Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. So in this one, we're going to cover selecting actors within our scene. It's been requested quite a bit. It is going to be quite a long tutorial because we're going to cover scene components, actor components, overlay materials, blueprint interfaces, and event dispatches, all in the same thing. But we're going to create a modular system and setup that's easy to use, so when we jump into our game, we can have different actors do different things by selecting them. So if I jump in, we've got both hands with line traces coming off them. And when we point at an actor, we can see that it highlights that actor so we know what we're selecting. And when I point at it, we press an input. It'll actually make the actor do something. And then we can do that with all of them. And we can also stop those, as well as doing some cool stuff with the guns. So there's a lot to do. And we're going to cover quite a bit of it. And I also forgot to mention that we are going to look at the enhanced input system. I'm going to move this over to my other monitor, so I've got it as reference. And then what we're going to do is we're going to boot up a brand new template, and I'll come back once that's done. Excellent, so we're in a blank project. The only thing I've changed is my plugins, so I can use my headset without having the MetaXR plugin installed. So we're just using OpenXR. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of things. Rather than doing them all at the same time, I'm going to do them as they come up. But what we need to keep in mind is what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and how we're going to get there. So in this case, we need a line trace from our motion controller to detect what actor we hit. We then need our actor to be able to add inputs so we can select that actor and then have that go through to the actor itself, and also display an overlay material. So the video is going to be a little long, unfortunately, but hopefully by the end of it you'll have an idea of how all of these systems can work together and we can create something cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click inside of my blueprints folder, and I'm going to go to blueprint class, and we're going to start by creating a scene component. A scene component can be attached to other components and has a transform, which means it works really well for our line trace code, and it means we can just drag it on and reuse it. So instead of having to code everything twice for the right and left controller, we can just code it once, and we can tell that whether it is the left or right controller and drop it in. So we're going to create a scene component, sc_selection trace, and then we're going to open this up. And what we need to do in here is we need to delete these, and we're going to create a couple of custom events. So we're going to have a first custom event called activate selection trace, and then we're going to create another one, so custom event, and then update timer. We'll come back to this one in a minute. And then we're going to create a third one, custom event, deactivate selection trace. So the reason I have the activate selection trace and deactivate selection trace is because I'm going to use the code to only allow it to select objects if we're not holding an item. So if we're holding something, we're not going to calculate that trace, we're going to stop it, which we'll see later on. But it'll actually make it easier for us to work with also. Bit cheaper on performance as well, we're not running that trace all the time when it's kind of unnecessary. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the selection trace. I'm going to make sure there's a space in there, and we're going to do inputs. And what we want to do is we want to have a motion controller variable. So motion controller component, I'm going to do object reference. And this is going to be our motion controller aim. Excellent. And then we're going to have a second one, and this is going to be our hand enum. So if you search for hand and scroll right down to the bottom, you'll see that we have e controller hand, and then we name this as hand. And now we can get a reference from this inside of our player to set our motion controller aim and hand type. So I'm going to right click and promote both of these two variables because we need these as reference. And from here, we're going to create a set timer by event. So set timer by event, and we're going to plug that event into the delegate on our update timer custom event, and I find setting this to a value of 0.2 is pretty good, and then the looping. So what this is going to do is when we set this up in our player, it's going to activate this timer, and then this timer is going to run constantly, so it's going to fire out the ray for us for our line trace. We can now do line trace by channel, and we need to set up the direction that we're going. So we're going to get our motion controller reference, and we're going to get world location, and we're also going to get our forward. So get forward vector, and we're going to connect these up like so. So the world location goes to start, We then want to drag off and do a plus. And from get forward vector, we're going to do a multiply. So shift star. And we're going to convert this multiply by right clicking the bottom pin to a float. And this allows us to choose how far in front of us the traces will go. So I'm just going to set this to about 500. And I'm going to plug that into the plus and then that into the end. So now what we have is when we tell this to activate, it's going to start our timer and it's going to loop through this line trace every 0.02 seconds. And it's going to use our motion controller aim location and forward vector to decide whereabouts that's pointing. So we do the aim because different motion controllers have different aim locations built into them. So it just makes it a little bit easier to manage and we don't have to manually or physically change around the motion controllers to get where they're pointing. I'm only going to set the draw type to 1 frame, so we're not getting a whole bunch of lines, and then we're going to do a branch. So we do the branch because sometimes the line trace might not hit an actor and we don't want to fire everything else after it. We only want to fire once we hit something. So we get our hit and then we search for break hit result. And in this case, we're going to get our hit actor and we're going to search for a actor component with an interface. So the actor component is going to have its own bunch of code that is going to exist on the actor. And then we can use that to determine what we're doing with inputs and stuff. It'll make more sense as we get down the line. But this is really cool for selecting the actor component without having to cast to the actor, then get the actor component or get specific custom events and have it all cluttered. We're going to keep this as tidy as possible, as performant as possible, and as user-friendly as possible at the end, which will be really nice. So we're going to get component by interface. We don't have an interface yet. We will create that, but we're going to do a get a copy, and now we would fire the interface. So we don't have the interface, so we're going to create that. We're going to go to compile, go back to our content browser. I'm going to put it in blueprints. I'll just keep it all together. So I'm going to go to blueprints on the drop down and blueprint interface. So BPI underscore, what can I call it? We can name this BPI user interactions. Oh, user interactions, and we can open this up. And all we're going to do is we're going to name this function that we have here as hit actor. And this is where we're going to pass through our hand type. So we're going to go down here on the right with the function selected. And we're going to do inputs. We're going to search for hand again and search controller e hand and then name that variable hand. That way we get to see it. So if I do compile and continue, we can go back to our selection trace. And from this, I can actually search for hit actor. And you'll see that we get the blueprint interface user interaction that we've just created called hit actor message. And when we select this, we can see that we have the option to choose the hand. So we're going to plug this into true, and then we're going to take our hand variable and plug that in on the end here. And now with that set up, we can set up our deactivate selection trace. So we're going to do pause timer by function name, and it's just called update timer. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in like so. I'm going to hit compile. And that's actually it for our scene component. So our selection trace, that's all done. Oh, no, it's not. We didn't go to get components by interface and search for our new BPI user interaction. It's a good job I noticed that, otherwise it would not work. So with that done, we have it all set up. We're going to go to our player now and we're going to set this up so we can activate it. We're kind of doing a bit backwards, but we need to do it that way. So we're going to open up our VR pawn and I'm going to go down to my grab left and grab right sections. And this is where we're going to activate and deactivate our logic. So if we're holding an actor, we don't want to fire that trace. We don't want to accidentally hit the object that we're holding. So we're going to set that up. And to do so, we're going to select our motion controller left aim component on the left. And we're going to add a component. And that component is going to be our scene interaction. So SC underscore selection trace. It's going to ask me to rename it. I'm going to name this selection trace left. And I'm going to copy this and put it onto our motion controller right aim, paste it, rename it as right. Cool. So with that done, what we can do is we can drag these in. So right is on the bottom here. Let's just do that one. So selection trace right is what we just created. And we're going to search for activate selection trace. And we're doing this on the bottom here. So once we release an item, then we're firing that trace again. So we're going to plug it in before we do our try release onto complete. And our hand is the right hand, so we're going to change this drop down to right. And then we'll move up to the top row for started, and we're going to do our deactivate after our health component is done. So selection trace right, we're going to drag that in, search for deactivate, that's the wrong one. We want to do deactivate selection trace, plug that in, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the top row here. So we'll move this along, selection trace left, get, we'll do activate selection. I also realized that we didn't add the motion controller aim to the bottom row, so we'll do that really quick. So motion controller right grip. No, we want right aim. Motion controller right aim. Make sure that's on the right one. I had that messed up. So motion controller right aim. Grab that, plug it in. Motion controller selection trace left. And we want left aim to be plugged into here. And it's already set to left hand, so that's fine. So we just need to deactivate it. So we can do selection trace left and then search for deactivate, selection trace, like so. So now if we do file save all, we should actually be able to jump in and see our traces follow our hand. Cool. And now we can actually see that we've got our traces and they're hitting the actors in the scene, which is exactly what we're after. Cool. What we're also going to do, so if you test it here, what you'll notice is that the line traces don't appear until we press the grip buttons. That means the first line fires and then it activates a timer. What we want to do is you might want to do this on begin play. So an easy way to do that is to just select the activate stuff and then hold shift and we select both of those. We do Control C. If we move up to the grab component or the event begin play, we can connect these in like so. And this way, when the game starts, the traces will automatically activate. And then we can just leave that as it is. Excellent. So we compile. We could actually test this. And if I start the headset up and I get it to track with the right controller by just pressing the trigger, we should get our controller tracking. It's the Quest Pro. It's a little bit dodgy. There we go. But the line trace is there as well. And we're all good. So now what we can do is we can actually set up the receiving end of this hit actor. So what happens at the minute is our VR pawn, when it begins or when it's spawned in, it gets the two components that we've created, the scene components, and activates them. So inside of our selection tree, we get a reference to the motion controller that we're using and the hand. So you've got to think of this code as being doubled with two different sets of information. If you're really new, that's probably the best way to think about it, is this code is duplicated here and here. So we're passing two different lots of information into it. And that's where we store them inside of those references. So from here, on the hit, we look for an actor that has a component with the interface BPI user interaction. We don't have that yet, but we will. And then it fires the event hit actor and passes through the hand. If we're not, we deactivate the timer. So we stop calculating this whole line, this whole chain, and then we go from there. So the next step is going to be probably the most confusing and hardest to set up. We're going to be covering interfaces, event dispatchers, enhanced input system. So we got to do quite a bit. And to start that, we're going to create an actor component. So we're going to go to blueprint class and we're going to create an actor component. I'm going to call this AC underscore actor selection. I'm going to have this as it is. The difference between an actor component and a scene component is one does not have a transform, that is the actor component, and you can have more than one, but it exists on the actor itself. So if I open up the cube, for example, and we bring that in, what we can do is we can add the actor component that we just created, actor selection, and drag that in, and you'll see that it lines up a bit differently. So instead of it being attached to an object, it's kind of encompasses the whole actor. They're really cool. We're going to keep that one in there because we need that anyway. But for now, we're going to go to our content and we're going to open up our actor selection. So in here, we need to tell it that it's using the interface. Otherwise, the code that we currently have won't be able to detect it. So to do that, we're going to go to class settings. We're going to go down to implemented interfaces and we'll search for BPI. User interaction. And once we've done that, we'll see that we have this interfaces function here on the left. We're going to do compile just so it loads in. And now what I can do is I can search for event, hit actor. And we can see that if we hover over it, it says hit actor, the target is blueprint interface user interaction. Cool. So you might see me on occasion looking over to my notes. It's because this section is a little bit complicated. but it's quite simple overall. We'll take a look at it afterwards. I just can't remember it all off the top of my head. So the first thing we're going to do is start with a sequence. And what we're going to do to begin with is just follow the then 0. To do that, we're going to create a bit of a gap. We're going to do a do once. And we'll come back to the reset and the then 1 pin in a moment. And after this, we're going to enable input. So enable input. Okay, we might need to get our, so we're going to get the player controller, which is 0. And we're also going to get the owning, we're going to get the owner. So what that allows us to do is to do get input. So enable input from the player controller. The target is not going to be the player controller, it's going to be our get owner. And then our player controller is going to be our player controller. So what this is basically doing is says get the owner of this actor component. So whatever this actor component is on, in this case it's our grabbable small cube, it's going to get this blueprint for us and enable input inside of it. We then need to get the root component from the get owner. So get root component. So in this case, it's going to be our static mesh because that is the root component. And with the pistol, it's also going to be the same. So pistol, skeleton mesh gun is the root component. And what that allows us to do is cast to the mesh component. And this is going to look at static meshes, skeleton meshes, anything like that. And it's going to get a reference to it for us. We do this because it's the only way we can really set the overlay material from inside of the actor component. And that way the actor itself doesn't even need to care about it. The actor doesn't know what's happening. It's just this actor component is going to say, okay, the line trace has hit the actor. We want to set the overlay material. So we're going to drag off and actually we're going to right click. We're going to promote to variable. We'll keep a reference to this. We'll need it. And then we're going to set the overlay material. So set overlay material. We'll create that in just a minute. But what we're doing here is we're setting a reference to the hit component so we can access it later on. So we'll have a reference to what's being hit and then we can disable and remove the overlay later down the line without having to recast to it. Just so I don't forget, I might actually break this one here and we'll go build the overlay material just so we can keep that in line. Kind of follow it in the process that I build it in. So for materials, we'll keep this pretty neat. We're going to go to our materials folder, right click material. I'm going to create m_overlay, or we'll just do overlay. We've already got material, m_overlay, and I'm going to create a color by holding down the 3 key. So this is a vector 3, so if you need to search for it, we can just do vector 3, should come up, constant vector 3, and then I'm going to plug this into our base color. So this is going to be the color of our overlay material. I'm going to set this to something like bright green, and right now it's pretty solid, so we're going to change our blend mode to translucent. Translucent materials are quite expensive, so this is why we enable and disable it when we can. And now you can see that it's blocked out a whole bunch of stuff, but we have emissive color and opacity. We're going to do a Fresnel, so let's just do a normal Fresnel. We're going to plug that straight into opacity, and then we're going to have a multiply from the output pin and plug that into emissive. So that'll give us a bit of a glow or a brighter color. We can change the values however you'd like. So put it up to about 2, which would be pretty cool. And just for the normals, I do vertex. So it gets the vertex normal world space of the actual mesh that we're using. And it uses that to help color it in a little bit nicer. So you can see that we switch it and we can get a nice little effect going. I also, in my demo project, have the exponent set to value of 10. And this value is set to 0.1, which subtles it out a little bit, but it makes the highlights a little bit better. See it better in the sphere. There we go. So you can play around with these values to get something that you like. And then this will also work on mobile VR as well, without having to do post-processing, which is super cool. Now we have that done, we can go back to our actor component actor selection. And we can set that material in the set overlay material node. So right now we have this line. If I go to compile and then play, we should be able to jump to the headset, get our line trace pointing. When we hover over it, it just needed to compile the shaders. So we can see that when we hover over it, it actually changes the materials on those cubes. It doesn't on the guns because it doesn't have that actor component, but it does on the cubes, which is exactly what we're after. Now we're going to set up our mapping context. So if you've never used the enhanced input system before, it's essentially a modular input system that allows us to add and remove inputs when required. So in this case, when the line trace hits an actor and it applies our overlay material, we're going to enable inputs which we've mapped to specific buttons to say, okay, we're pointing at this, we can press this button and we can make the actor do something. So we're going to get the player controller, so get player controller, and we'll search for enhanced input subsystem, so get enhanced input local player subsystem, and we're going to add mapping context. Going to plug that into our set overlay, and for our mapping context we're actually going to drag off that and search for select. Cool, so we get the selection option, and what we can do here is we can pass through basically a variable, a boolean, to choose whether it's left or right handed and apply that mapping context for that hand. So index, we're going to set this to boolean. We could actually do hand and then do controller hand enum, but you'll see that we get all of these variables that we don't need. So this is why we're kind of avoiding that. So I'm just going to do that again. We're going to do a select. We're going to set this to a boolean. And before we add our inputs, we're going to sort the index out. And that's a case of going to our event hit, dragging off it, searching for equal, and then we bring this over to about here because we're going to need it for another inputs. I'm going to change this to right. I find that works a little bit better. And then we're going to plug that boolean straight into our select node. So if the hand that is coming into this actor component equals right, it's going to set to true and it's going to use the right input action. So let's set that up now. So we're going to go to our inputs folder inside of VR template inputs. We're going to right click. We're going to go to our actions folder, and then in here we're going to right click, and then we're going to create a new input action. So this input action IA underscore selection, and I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to call this description selection. If you're duplicating an already existing input mapping, you need to make sure you change this, otherwise it will break some stuff. So make sure that the action description is unique to the actual input action that you're creating. Value type, I'm going to leave this to digital bool because I'm going to use the A and X button on my controllers. If you're doing a grip, what you might need to do is an axis float. It's entirely up to you. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as the digital bool. I'm going to hit save, and now what we can do is go back to our folder inside of input, and we're going to create some new mapping context. We're going to create two. So input mapping context IMC underscore selection underscore left, and then we're going to duplicate this to do duplicate, and we're going to name this one selection right. We are just using the same input action because we only need the one event. So I'm going to open up selection left, and then go to mappings, do the drop down with a plus, and then in here I'm going to select, so input action selection, and I'm going to give this mapping, because this is my left hand, left controller, X. So I'm using the Oculus Touch, I'm just going to set this up with the press. So Oculus Touch, left controller, X press. Hit save, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the input mapping context selection right. Open this up, mappings, selection, and then in here we're going to do Oculus Touch, scroll down till we find the right, and we do Oculus Touch, right controller, A press. Hit save, and now we can go back to our actor selection, or what we could probably do is, to make sure that they work, is go to our PMI underscore VR template. So I'm doing the tutorial in 5.3. You might not need this or have it in 5.4, but it should still work. So PMI VR template, I'm going to open this up, go to contexts, I'm going to press plus twice, does only let you do once, and then search for selection left, and then selection right. I'm going to change these priorities to 1, and then we're going to hit save. You might be able to leave the priorities at 0, it's not too much difference, but I found that 1 is a bit better. I'm going to close these down now because we're actually done with the overlay, the input selections, and all of that. And what we want to do is on false, we want to search for selection left, and then for true, we want selection right. So now, based on the hand input that comes in, if the hand equals right, it's going to use the right mapping context. We can also reuse this, so it's probably best if I move this down and then do a reroute node just to clean this up. And we can now move on to the deselection stuff. So it's basically what happens is when the line trace is not hitting the actor or the actor component, we're going to remove the mapping context. We're going to remove the overlay material as well and disable input. So we're kind of doubling up on some stuff that we've done here, but it's super easy to do. First thing we'll do is a retriggerable delay. So if you don't know how a sequence works, it fires the first line, and once that completes, it then fires the second line. So in this case, we're firing on a timer. So every 0.2 seconds, this hit actor, as long as we're pointing at it, is rapidly firing. So this sequence kind of works like a flip-flop. It keeps going back and forth. So every time this retriggerable delay is hit, it restarts this timer. I'm going to change the value to 0.2. This way there isn't a little delay when we move away from it. And what this is going to do is every time this is hit, it's going to stop and not fire any of this code. So it's only going to fire the top. So from the retriggerable delay, we want to set the overlay material. And we're going to do that by just copy and pasting this one. So actually, it'd be easier to just get the variable. So get the mesh component and then set overlay material. And we can leave this on select asset. So basically, it's going to set it to none. So it removes it for us after 0.2 seconds of not being hit. We're then going to remove mapping context. We're then going to get the player controller again, get the subsystem, get enhanced input player subsystem, and then remove mapping context. Plug that in like so. And in this case, the mapping context to remove is also going to be this pin here. So say, depending on if it's right or left-handed, we're just going to remove that input. We can then disable the input for the actor. So I'm just going to go to here, copy these two nodes, and then from get player controller disable input, plug that in, and then to the restart. So get owner goes to the target, player controller goes to player controller. Make sure that these are not overlapping as I had there. And that is it for our top line. So what happens is our player has the scene components attached to them, and then they're activated, and in turn they fire the trace. So the trace channel, whether we're grabbing something or not grabbing something, is activated or deactivated. It then activates the timer inside of the selection trace, which fires this line trace. And then when we hit an actor, we check to see if it has a component with the interface BPI user interaction. If it does, we get the first one in the list, and then we call the hit actor event. So this is essentially saying, get the actor, which is going to be grabbable small cube, get the actor selection component in there that has the blueprint interface, get the first one, and then hit actor. So inside actor component, we fire this event. It fires the sequence line, so it goes from then 0 all the way through to the do once. And we only fire this whole section one time if we're hitting it constantly. We don't need to fire this on tick, so there's no point firing this or updating this section with the timer. We just need to do it once. It then waits to see if we're not hitting or if this event is not being hit. If it does, it waits 0.2 seconds and then removes the overlay, removes the mapping context, and then disables input for that actor. This way, we're only doing things when we need to, and we also don't need to do a do once because this section is only firing once we stop hitting. So it's not going to fire it again until this top row activates. So now we can actually set up our input actions. So we added the mapping context to add inputs. And in this case, rather than doing it inside of the actor itself, I'm going to do it inside of the actor component. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and do input action underscore selection. And in here, we have the inputs that we've added. And we're only going to use the started. So every time I press this button, it's going to switch between which one we're doing. I could do a flip flop, but the problem with that is if you go off and then back on, it might not fire in the correct order. So we're going to do a branch. And I'm going to create a condition, a new Boolean called activated. Oh, I've already got one from an error. Let's rename this to activated like so. We're then going to set up activated to set. We're going to duplicate this down, so false and true. If it's true, we're going to select activated. If it's false, we're going to set this to off. No, the other way around. Sorry. And now what we can do is we can set up our event dispatchers. If you've never used event dispatchers before, they're essentially a way of sending messages from one blueprint to the other by having the other blueprint listen for them. So we're going to create a event dispatcher called actor selected, and we're going to call this, and then we're going to create a new event dispatcher called actor deselected. Actor deselected. We're going to take that, we're going to call this one from the bottom. So when we first press the button, we activate what it is we're trying to activate, and then when we press the button again, we deactivate it. So this way, if we point away from the actor, it doesn't really care. As soon as we point back, it'll know which one we're on. So now inside of our grabbable small cube, we can actually make this do something. So we've added our actor component, our actor selection. We can drag this in, and you can see here we have two events. We've got actor selected and actor deselected, which is what we created. We're not going to create them here. We're not going to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to drag off the selection, and we're going to search for assign, and we're going to assign actor selected. And then we're going to drag off again and do assign actor deselected. And what this allows us to do is from begin play, we can plug it in, delete the other nodes. And now this actor is listening for this selection. So we can plug this in like so, have it go down. And in the demo example that I showed, what I do is I add a rotator. So a rotating movement. We then just hit auto activate at the bottom. I think it's behind my head, which is pretty good. There it is. Auto activate, and then when we drag that in, we can do activate when we press select, and then we can also do deactivate once we press the deselect. And now when we hit compile and we press play, we do save all, we can jump in, and when we press play, we get our controllers, line traces, and then when we hover over something, we can see that it's adding the overlay material. And when I press A on the controller, it actually enables that rotation and then stops it. So I can go through each one and do it as it is. So now let's do something with the guns, which is super easy and super cool. All we have to do is add the actor component. So let's say we've got our gun. We're going to open this up, browse to asset, load it in. We say add actor component underscore selection actor selection. And we can actually copy the same code from the grab component, the small cube, into the pistol. Paste that in. We don't have rotating movement, so in this case I will take the skeletal mesh gun. I'm just going to say set material, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the right. So set material. Oh, that is not the right one. We want to set this back to the default gun, so FP gun, and in here I'm just going to select the magnifying glass to take me straight to it. I'm going to duplicate it, do FP gun 1, open this up. Just doing this real quick, I'm going to change the color. Let's say we'll do bright pink, why not? And then we'll hit apply. And now back into our pistol, we can do on the set, we can search for gun and do our gun with pink. So compile, save, file, save all. We'll let this do its thing. And now if we jump into the project, make it full screen, we can actually go in there. We can take our selection pointers, point our cubes, we can make them rotate. We can take the guns, and when we select it, we can actually change the materials in there. Although it's doing it for both the inputs. So there is an issue, and I know exactly what that is. The problem is inside of our VR pawn, I don't think I changed hands. Okay, so to fix that, what we need to do is we actually have to have a second selection. It was me trying to save on some code, but in the end, we just need to take both of it, and then both of these, so they're right and select. We're going to take the hand as well. Going to drop this down straight to the end, plug that in, and plug this one into the end node. So we have two different ones. So it remembers which one we're doing on start and which one's at the end. So right, we're going to make sure they're both on right. So now when we press start and jump in, we can actually point at a cube, and when I press the other controller, it's not going to turn off. So that's one way we can do it. And then we can kind of go through and turn these on or off, which is actually a lot of fun. And you can have this open up G windows, so inside of the actors. And basically it just means anything you want to happen, you just have to add the actor selection component and do this little bit of code. And then from the selection event and the deselect, you can fire whatever you want to happen. So let's say we've got one of these cubes in the background. Pretty sure we could add the actor component in here. So actor action selection. That wouldn't work because this is not a blueprint actually. Yeah, it's as simple as that. You can just create an actor, add the actor component. So actor component, actor selection to it. And then as long as you paste in pretty much this code here with these nodes, you can have whatever you want happen off it. And it keeps the whole thing really neat and a lot tidier than you would if you had line traces in the player and then interfaces going to the actors and references through the hands. This is just an easy way of doing it, and this is how I personally would attempt to build something like this to make life a little bit easier. So if you enjoyed this, make sure to head over to the Patreon or the members section, check those out. It's really helpful, and you get early access to videos like this, as well as some behind the scenes content that you don't normally get over on the YouTube, which is awesome. A lot of mixed reality content over at the minute. If you've got any questions, make sure to head over to Discord. I'm in there most days, and so is everybody else. And then if you want to download these files, they'll be available for Patreon and members only. But yeah, if you've got any questions or you want to see me take this anywhere else, make sure to leave a like and subscribe before telling me. I don't tell people enough to do that. But yeah, thank you to everyone who is a member and a Patreon. Names at the end. Bye.